My name is Michael Rains, and this isn't the story of how I became rich. It's the story of how I stopped being invisible. I didn't start out broken. Once upon a time, I had a wife I adored, a small home with pale blue shutters, a steady job at a mid-tier architecture firm, and the kind of life people call ordinary but good. We weren't glamorous, but we had plans, vacations that never happened, promises that aged faster than we did, and laughter that used to fill every quiet corner of our house. Her name was Leora. She had a voice that could melt my anger before I even knew I had any. We met in college, built our lives from scratch. I thought she was my forever person. But forever has a strange way of ending when one heart starts keeping score. I remember the first time I realized she'd stopped looking at me the same way. We were sitting at the kitchen table, her scrolling through her phone, me sketching designs for a client presentation. I asked if she wanted to grab dinner out, maybe see a movie. She said she was tired. But her phone lit up again, and she smiled, soft, quick, like something she didn't want me to see. That was 3 years before she left. 3 years of growing silence between us. At first, I blamed work. I thought maybe the late nights, the deadlines, the forgotten anniversaries had built walls I didn't see. So I tried harder. Flowers on Thursdays. Weekend trips. Compliments I meant, even when I was too tired to speak them. But nothing reached her anymore. Her eyes were somewhere else. Eventually, I found out where. His name was Conrad, her boss. The man who wore confidence like a cologne. The kind who smiled like he already owned the world. I don't know when it started. I don't even remember how I found out. Just that one night, I checked her phone out of pure desperation, and there it was. A string of messages that made my stomach twist so hard I had to sit down. Can't wait to see you tomorrow, beautiful. Same time. Don't forget your scarf. Love how it looks on you. It wasn't even the words that killed me. It was the ease of them. The casual warmth. Like I'd been replaced by routine. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She just looked tired. As if my heartbreak was an inconvenience. Michael, she said quietly, we're not happy. You know it. I know it. I could have tried harder. I don't want you to, she said. It's already done. And that was it. No screaming. No shattered plates. Just the soft sound of my heart caving in. A month later, she was gone, moved in with him. She left the house, the mortgage, the car payment, the bills. I kept the dog, a pile of debt, and a silence that felt like a weight pressing on my chest. For a while, I thought I'd bounce back. I told myself people get divorced every day. They move on, they heal, they rebuild. But my life didn't get better. It got smaller. I threw myself into work to drown out the noise. But grief doesn't disappear when you ignore it, it waits. And when the company downsized 6 months later, I was the easiest name to cross off. No savings. No backup plan. Just a few final paychecks, a couple of boxes, and a lease I couldn't renew. I sold what I could, furniture, clothes, even my watch. The rest went into storage I couldn't afford to keep. The day the landlord changed the locks, I sat on the curb outside the apartment and laughed. It wasn't funny, but it was the only sound that felt real. That night, I slept in my truck for the first time. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. I parked near the docks, rolled down the window just enough to feel the ocean breeze, and told myself it was temporary. Just a few nights. A week maybe. But nights blurred into weeks. I showered at the gym until my membership expired. Then at the public pool until they banned non-swimmers. I started parking behind a diner because the cook there, an old man named Hank, sometimes gave me leftovers. He never asked questions. Just handed me a paper bag and said, eat before it gets cold. There's a kind of dignity in hunger you don't understand until you've felt it, the way you pretend you're fine even when your stomach twists like it's eating itself. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the diner's glass, beard unshaven, clothes worn thin, and I wouldn't recognize the man staring back. He looked like someone's ghost. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a voice kept whispering, hold on. It wasn't loud or heroic. Just stubborn. I started picking up small labor jobs. Loading docks, painting fences, clearing lots. Money came in small bursts, enough for gas, coffee, and the occasional shower at a truck stop. But never enough to start over. The hardest part wasn't the hunger. It wasn't even the loneliness. It was the invisibility. People stop seeing you when you fall below their comfort zone. Eyes glance past, like your existence disrupts the rhythm of their world. Once I stood outside a grocery store, holding a sign that said, "Looking for work?" An old woman dropped $1 into my hand without looking at me. I wanted to tell her, "I'm not begging. I'm just trying." But the words stuck in my throat. Every night, I park behind that same diner, staring at the neon sign flickering open 24 hours. I'd listen to the hum of conversations, laughter spilling through the glass, and I'd imagine myself inside, warm, clean, laughing at something stupid. Instead, I sat on the curb with a stale sandwich, the cold creeping through my sleeves. That's when I started talking to myself. Not out loud, just in my head. Conversations with a man I used to be. I'd ask him what he would have done differently. He never answered. Maybe he was gone. But one night something shifted. It was raining hard, one of those storms that feel personal. My truck's roof leaked, so I sat in the driver's seat with a towel pressed to the ceiling, trying to keep the drip from hitting my lap. The diner lights blurred through the rain, all golden, red, and ghostly. I closed my eyes and thought of Leora. I wondered if she was happy, if Conrad made her laugh the way I once did. I wondered if she ever thought of me at all. Then I realized it didn't matter. She'd made her choice. I was still here, breathing, broken maybe, but alive. And in that strange, wet silence, I whispered to myself, "It's strange how silence can sound louder when you've lost everything that made noise in your life." It wasn't poetry. It was survival. I didn't know then that this night, this quiet, soaked, miserable night, was the last I'd ever spend as a man forgotten by the world. Because just as dawn began to stain the clouds pale pink, I heard the low hum of an engine pull up behind me. Black car. Sleek. Clean. The kind you don't see near places like this. The window rolled down, slow, deliberate. A man stepped out tall, in a dark coat that looked far too expensive for the cracked asphalt beneath him. He scanned the lot like he was searching for someone. Then his eyes found me. He hesitated, studied my face, and took a step closer. "Excuse me," he said, voice calm but certain. "Are you Michael Rains?" I froze. The sound of my name felt foreign, like hearing a language I hadn't spoken in years. "Who's asking?" I managed. The man's expression softened slightly. "My name's Victor Hale," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. "I've been looking for you for a while." I blinked, rain dripping from my hair. "You've got the wrong guy," he shook his head. "I don't think so." He held out an envelope, sealed and stamped. The paper was crisp, almost out of place in the gray morning. "You might want to sit down," he said. I stared at him, heart thudding, not from fear, but from something else I couldn't name. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the faintest spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I took the envelope. My name was printed neatly on it. And for the first time in years, I wondered, what if my story wasn't over yet? I've been called a lot of things over the past year. Sir, buddy, man, hey you. But it had been a long time since someone said my name with intention. The man stood a few feet away, his black coat cutting through the pale light like something from a different world. The rain had eased into mist, soft and steady, coating his shoulders with tiny silver droplets. He didn't flinch. He didn't even seem to notice. "Are you Michael Rains?" he asked again, his voice even, measured. Something about him made me uneasy, not dangerous, exactly, just too composed for this setting. The diner parking lot wasn't a place for people like him. People in tailored suits didn't stop near rusted pickup trucks and half-empty coffee cups. I hesitated. "Who's asking?" He smiled, just a flicker of civility. "My name is Victor Hale. I'm an attorney, well, technically a legal executor. I've been looking for you." I almost laughed. "An attorney? Out here? At 6 in the morning?" He nodded once, unbothered. "Yes. That's a creative," I said. "What's next?" "You tell me I've won the lottery." He didn't blink. Not quite, but close enough. That was when I knew. This guy had to be running some kind of scam. The kind where they tell you you've inherited money from a long-lost relative, then ask for your processing fee before disappearing into thin air. I'd seen the flyers before. Hell, I'd thrown them away. "Listen, I don't have any family worth inheriting anything from," I said. "So whatever this is, you can stop wasting your time." Victor studied me, eyes calm but sharp. "Your skepticism is reasonable," he said. If I were in your position, I think the same thing. But I assure you, Mr. Rains, this is no scam. I folded my arms. Right? And I'm the Prince of Wales. He didn't smile this time. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thin, leather-bound folder. He flipped it open and held out a document encased in clear plastic. Do you recognize this name? He asked. I squinted. Type letters. A seal at the bottom. Sebastian Rains. The name hit me like a faint echo from another lifetime. My uncle. I murmured before I could stop myself. Yes, Victor said quietly. Sebastian Rains. He passed away last month. I'm the executor of his estate. I looked up sharply. That's impossible. I haven't spoken to him since I was a kid. We weren't close. That's true, Victor said, his tone respectful but firm. He mentioned the estrangement in his will. He also made it very clear who he wanted his assets to go to. You're his only living heir. The parking lot felt heavier suddenly, the air thicker. My pulse quickened in my chest. What are you saying? I asked. I'm saying, he replied evenly, that you've inherited something substantial. Quite substantial, actually. And before you ask, yes, it's been verified by the state and banking authorities. The estate has been in probate for weeks. We just couldn't locate you. I stared at him. For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of water dripping from my truck's roof. You found me, I said softly. Victor gave a slight nod. Finally. My throat felt dry. And how much are we talking about? He tilted his head. Mr. Rains, this isn't the place to discuss financial details. You look like you could use something warm to eat and a roof over your head. Let me take you somewhere more comfortable. I'll explain everything. I almost said no. Every instinct in me screamed, don't trust this. I've been burned too many times. By people, by hope, by my own faith in the good of strangers. But then I looked down at the envelope still in my hands. My name was printed on it. My real name. And underneath the official seal was a signature I hadn't seen in over 20 years. Sebastian Rains. The uncle my father used to curse under his breath. The man who had vanished from family gatherings like a ghost, leaving behind whispers about business deals, betrayals, and money. When I was a kid, Sebastian sent me a birthday card once. It had $20 in it, crisp, new, folded in half. My dad tore it up before I could even touch it. Blood money, he'd said. You don't take from him. And that was that. So why, after all this time, would Sebastian leave me anything? Victor must have seen the confusion on my face because he softened his tone. Mr. Rains, I know this is a lot to process. I can prove every word I've said. If you let me buy you breakfast, I'll show you the paperwork. I hesitated again, caught between suspicion and curiosity. Finally, I sighed. If you're scamming me, you're going to be really disappointed, I said. I don't even have $10 to my name. Victor smiled faintly. Then you have nothing to lose. He gestured toward the car, a black sedan, polished, tinted windows, quiet as a whisper. I glanced at my reflection in the door's sheen, unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing a jacket that used to be brown but had faded into something nameless. I looked like someone who didn't belong anywhere near this man or his car. Still, I opened the door. The interior smelled of leather and something faintly citrus. My seat sank beneath me like I'd just been swallowed by comfort itself. Victor slid in beside me, adjusted his cuffs, and started the engine. Diner's still open, he asked. I blinked. You're serious about breakfast? He smiled. You look like you haven't had a hot meal in a while. He wasn't wrong. We pulled around to the front of Hank's diner, the neon open sign still buzzing weakly. Hank raised his eyebrows when he saw me step out with a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of Forbes. Inside, the warmth hit me like a wave. The air smelled of bacon, coffee, and butter, things I hadn't tasted in days. Victor ordered pancakes and coffee for both of us, like this was the most ordinary morning in the world. He waited until I'd taken the first bite before opening his folder again. Sebastian Rains, he began, sliding a paper toward me, passed away at 79. He left behind multiple properties, investments, and liquid assets. You are listed as the sole beneficiary. I frowned. You keep saying that, but I don't understand why. Victor folded his hands. That's a fair question. Your uncle was a private man, but according to the notes he left for me, he followed your life from a distance. He knew about your marriage, your work, your struggles. That made my stomach twist. What? How? Money opens doors, Mr. Rains, Victor said simply. He had access to information. He kept tabs on you, but never interfered. Until now. I pushed the plate aside. So this is guilt money? I wouldn't call it that. Victor paused. He called it a correction. I looked up sharply. A correction? He wrote, Victor said, flipping through his notes. Michael has the one thing the rest of them lost, heart. He never came asking for anything. That's why I want him to have everything. I couldn't breathe for a second. My hand shook around the coffee mug. I'd spent so long feeling like a failure that hearing anyone, say I was worthy felt like a foreign language. I don't know what to say, I whispered. Victor gave a small smile. You don't have to say anything yet. Just listen. He outlined the estate in measured tones. An inheritance worth $47 million. Assets, stocks, and properties spread across 3 states. I listened in disbelief, the numbers blurring together like noise. When he finished, I stared down at my coffee, the reflection of my tired face rippling in the surface. This can't be real, I said. I'm living out of a truck. And that's exactly why he chose you, Victor replied. You've known loss. You've known hunger. He believed you'd understand the value of what he left you. For a moment, the diner went silent. Hank was refilling cups at another table. The jukebox hummed faintly in the corner, and I just sat there, half in disbelief, half in a kind of fragile. What happens now? I asked finally. Now, Victor said, closing his folder, you sign a few preliminary documents. We'll verify your ID, handle the estate transfers, and arrange a temporary residence for you while everything is processed. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a hotel key card and an address. I took the liberty of booking a room for you, he said. It's clean, quiet, and private. You'll have time to think. I took the key card in silence. The plastic felt too light to mean anything, and yet it meant everything. When we stepped back outside, the sun had fully risen, spilling gold across the wet pavement. My truck looked smaller, somehow fragile, like a remnant of another man's life. Victor extended his hand. I'll contact you this evening once the initial confirmations are in. I shook it. His grip was firm, confident. As he turned to leave, he paused, glanced back, and said quietly, You might not believe it yet, Mr. Rains, but your life just changed. Then he was gone, car door shutting with a soft thud, engine fading into the distance until all I could hear again was the hum of the diner sign. I stood there for a long time, staring at the hotel key card in my palm. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or run. All I knew was this. For the first time in months, I felt something more powerful than fear. I felt the faint tremor of possibility. And somewhere inside me, beneath the hunger, the shame, and the disbelief, something whispered, maybe, just maybe, this is the start of getting my life back. I stood outside the diner long after Victor's car disappeared down the road, the hotel key card clutched in my hand like a fragile secret. The rain had stopped completely, but the air still smelled of it. Wet asphalt, salt, and something faintly electric, like change humming in the distance. The morning traffic was starting to pick up. A few cars rolled past, headlights flickering against puddles. I watched them absently, wondering if any of those drivers could tell, just by looking, that something impossible had just happened to me. Probably not. I still looked the same, worn clothes, tired eyes, a man the world barely noticed. And yet, inside, everything felt different. I turned the key card over in my hand. A cheap piece of plastic, embossed with gold letters, Shoreline Suites. It didn't look like much, but it might as well have been a golden ticket. I climbed back into my truck and sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel, trying to decide if I believed any of it. A $47 million inheritance. From an uncle I barely remembered. It sounded like something out of one of those late-night scam commercials. You may already be a millionaire. But Victor Hale didn't strike me as a liar. He had the kind of composure that didn't need to convince. It simply was. Every word he said had landed too cleanly, too precisely. And the name on that document, Sebastian Rains, wasn't random. It was a ghost from my past. As I drove toward the hotel, the memories started surfacing, slow and scattered like smoke rising through water. Sebastian Rains, my father's older brother. The one no one ever talked about unless it was to curse his name. When I was 7, I overheard my father shouting into the phone, voice low but sharp enough to cut. You think money fixes everything, Seb? You think a wire transfer makes you a brother again? Keep it. Then the sound of glass breaking, my mother's voice pleading quietly, and the front door slamming so hard the house shook. After that, I never heard his name again. The only reason I even knew what my uncle looked like was because of one photo I found years later in my mother's jewelry box. Two young men standing beside an old muscle car, both smiling like the world belonged to them. My father's arm was slung around Sebastian's shoulders. You could tell they were brothers, the same strong jawline, the same crooked half-smile. But where my dad's eyes were warm, Sebastian's held something sharper. Confidence. Maybe arrogance. When I showed the photo to my mom, she snatched it away so quickly I thought she might tear it. Forget him, Michael, she'd said. Some people don't belong in family stories anymore. So I did. Or at least I thought I did. The hotel wasn't far. A modest place perched near the docks, with faded coral paint and a neon sign that buzzed faintly against the gray sky. Shoreline Suites. It wasn't luxury, but it was more than I'd had in months. I parked in the corner of the lot, looked once more at my truck, the only home I'd known for far too long, and whispered, "Don't worry, old friend. I'll come back for you." The lobby was small but warm. The carpet smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and salt air. A woman at the front desk smiled as I approached, her tone polite but cautious. Checking in, I nodded, sliding the key card across. Michael Rains. She tapped a few keys, glanced at her monitor, then handed me a form. Mr. Hale already handled the deposit. You're all set. Mr. Hale. The word sounded surreal. Someone had handled something for me. Breakfast ends at 10, she added. There's hot coffee in the lobby all day. Thank you, I murmured. The elevator was slow, the kind that hums in protest with every floor. My room was on the third, nothing fancy but clean. Bed made, curtains drawn halfway, a faint hum of air conditioning filling the silence. For a long time, I just stood there. I'd been sleeping in the back of a pickup truck for months, and now there was a rail bed in front of me. Sheets, a bathroom, a roof. I sat down carefully, half expecting someone to burst through the door and tell me it was all a mistake. But no one came. The clock on the nightstand ticked softly. The ocean murmured faintly through the open window. And just like that, the exhaustion I'd been carrying for months hit me all at once. I don't remember lying down. I only remember closing my eyes and feeling, for the first time in a long time, safe. I woke to a knock on the door. For a moment, I panicked, thinking I'd overstayed, that it had all been a dream. But when I opened the door, Victor stood there, briefcase in hand, same calm expression. Good morning, Mr. Rains. May I come in? I nodded, stepping aside. He placed the briefcase on the small table by the window, opened it, and began arranging papers with surgical precision. Sleep well, he asked. I think I did, I said quietly. I don't remember the last time I woke up in a bed. He gave a small nod, as if filing that information away without judgment. I brought some documentation. Proof of the estate and your relation to Mr. Sebastian Rains. He handed me a folder. Inside were photographs, grainy but real. One showed my uncle standing beside a yacht, sun glinting off his sunglasses. Another, a corporate headshot, stern and professional. Then one that stopped me cold, Sebastian at what looked like a family gathering, arm slung around a woman. I recognized instantly. My mother. She was smiling, genuinely smiling. I hadn't seen that expression on her face in years. What is this from? I asked, my voice catching. Approximately 30 years ago, Victor said. Before the falling out, I stared at the photo again. My parents looked young, carefree. Sebastian stood behind them, grin wide, his hand raised in a half salute. There was warmth there, real warmth. It was hard to reconcile that image with the anger that had lived in my father's voice whenever his brother's name came up. What happened between them? I asked. Victor hesitated. Your father and Sebastian went into business together briefly. Real estate investment, primarily. Something went wrong, an accusation of fraud, from what I understand. Your father believed Sebastian betrayed him. Sebastian believed the opposite. I frowned. And you know this how? Your uncle was meticulous about record keeping. He left behind journals, letters, even recordings. He was a man obsessed with legacy and regret. Regret. That word lodged somewhere deep in my chest. So why me? I said. If they hated each other so much, why not donate the money? Why not leave it to charity or anyone else? Victor's expression softened. Because despite everything, you were still family. And he followed you, Mr. Rains. Quietly. Consistently. I blinked. He followed me? He nodded. He had private investigators check in occasionally, not to interfere, but to ensure you were alive and well. He knew about your marriage, your career, even your hardships. My stomach dropped. He knew I was homeless. Victor looked down briefly. Yes. I didn't know what to feel. Shame, anger, gratitude, all tangled together. He watched me struggle, I said quietly, and didn't reach out. He believed you wouldn't accept help, Victor said. He told me once, Michael has the pride of a Rains. He'd rather fall on his sword than take charity. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That sounds like him. So he waited. Victor continued. He knew time would come for him, and he made arrangements. You were always meant to inherit. He just didn't want to change your path while you were walking it. I ran a hand over my face. This is insane. Understandable, Victor replied. But true. He pulled another document from the case, a notarized will, stamped and sealed. My name was written clearly. To my nephew, Michael Allen Rains, I bequeath all remaining assets and holdings under my name, without condition. My throat tightened. Without condition. He didn't ask me to do anything for it. Didn't demand forgiveness or obligation. Just gave it. What was he like? I asked softly. You knew him. Victor leaned back slightly, as if measuring his answer. Complicated. Brilliant, at times cruel. But not without conscience. He had the mind of a businessman, and the heart of a man who never quite learned how to love properly. That sounded about right. I thought my father, how he used to say, Sebastian could charm the devil, but he couldn't keep a promise. And yet here I was, staring at the last promise Sebastian had ever made, and somehow he kept it. Victor closed the folder. I'll need to verify some identification documents before we proceed with transfers. Do you have any current ID? I hesitated. I have an expired driver's license. That's it. He nodded. That'll do for now. We can request state verification later. Then he reached into his briefcase again, pulled out another envelope, and slid toward me. This is a stipend, he said. A temporary fund until the estate clears probate. Use it for meals, clothes, whatever you need. I opened the envelope. Inside was a check. $10,000. I stared at it like it was on fire. This can't be right. It's perfectly standard, he said calmly. And entirely yours. My hand shook. $10,000. I hadn't held more than a few crumpled bills in months. Victor, I said quietly, if this turns out to be fake, I might actually lose my mind. He smiled faintly. I assure you, Mr. Rains, it's very real. He stood, buttoned his coat. I'll be in touch tomorrow. Get some rest. And try to believe, just a little. After he left, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the check, the photos, the will. My uncle. My father's brother. The name I was told to forget. And now somehow that name was all I had left. That night, I ordered a hot meal from room service, something I hadn't done in years. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, coffee. I ate slowly, tasting everything. Then I stood at the window, watching the ocean shift under the moonlight. The world outside looked the same. But inside me, something was changing. Not joy, not yet. Just the quiet tremor of maybe. Maybe this wasn't punishment anymore. Maybe this was grace, arriving late but still on time. I looked down at the photo again, my uncle's arm around my parents', their smiles caught in sunlight. I whispered to the memory, I didn't forget you, not really. I just didn't know I was allowed to remember. Then I turned off the light, lay on the bed, and closed my eyes, half expecting to wake up back in my truck. The whole thing nothing but another cruel dream. But when morning came, the bed was still there. The room was still warm. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like a beginning. The light came before the sound. Soft and gold, spilling through the thin hotel curtains, brushing against my face like it had been waiting for me to wake up. For a second, I didn't remember where I was. The sheets felt too clean, there too still. My hand reached instinctively for the roof of my truck, only to touch cool linen instead. It took me a full minute to breathe. I'd slept through the night without waking once. No cold creeping through cracked windows. No engine groaning under me. Just sleep. I sat up slowly, muscles protesting after months of cramped positions. My body didn't know how to be comfortable anymore. The clock said 7:12 a.m. The world outside was awake, horns in the distance, gulls crying over the ocean, a cart rolling somewhere down the hall. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, stared at my bare feet against the carpet, and whispered, "So this is what normal feels like." The silence didn't answer. I moved to the bathroom, turned the light on, and froze. For the first time in months, I saw myself in a mirror that wasn't cracked or smeared with fog. I barely recognized the man staring back. The beard was patchy, streaked with gray, that hadn't been there last year. My eyes looked hollow, the kind of hollow that didn't come from hunger alone. My cheeks had sunk in, and my hair, once dark and full, hung in uneven strands like I'd stopped caring halfway through everything. Which I guess I had. I leaned in closer, fingertips brushing the edge of the sink. Would a man with $47 million still look like this? I whispered. The man in the mirror didn't answer. He just looked tired. The water ran warm. I stood under the shower until the steam blurred my reflection completely. I watched months of grime swirl down the drain, watched as the scent of soap filled the air. My skin prickled, almost too sensitive to the sensation of being clean again. When I finally stepped out, I felt lighter, but fragile, like a newly hatched thing still unsure of the world. I shaved, slowly, carefully, almost reverently. The man who emerged wasn't new, exactly, but he was clearer. Beneath the stubble and dirt was someone I used to know. Someone who once had dreams, plans, a home. I didn't look rich. I didn't even look lucky. But I looked alive. Breakfast downstairs felt like an act of rebellion. The lobby smelled like coffee and cinnamon. I stood at the buffet, plate in hand, staring at choices I hadn't had in years. Eggs, toast, fruit. Simple things that once meant nothing now looked like miracles. I filled my plate, took a seat by the window, and ate slowly, tasting each bite like I was relearning how to live. Outside, the sea was calm, sunlight glittering across the water like scattered glass. I didn't know yet what to do with the day. The check Victor had given me still sat folded in my wallet, too unreal to cash. Part of me was afraid it might disappear the moment I tried. Halfway through my coffee, I saw him. Victor Hale, immaculate as ever, stepping through the lobby doors, briefcase in hand. He spotted me immediately and gave that small, precise nod I was starting to recognize as his version of a smile. "Good morning, Mr. Rains," he said, approaching my table. I stood instinctively, half out of respect, half out of disbelief that he was still here. "You came back," I said. "Of course," he replied evenly. "I told you I would." He gestured toward an empty chair. "May I?" "Please." He sat, opened his briefcase, and set a neat stack of papers in front of me. His movements were always deliberate, controlled, practiced. "I have some news," he said. My pulse quickened. "Good or bad?" He allowed the faintest hint of a smile. "Definitively good. This state verification has been completed." I stared. "That fast?" "Your uncle was efficient in his preparations. The holdings have cleared preliminary checks, trust accounts, property deeds, investment portfolios, even offshore holdings. All legitimate. All yours." For a long moment, the words didn't register. "All yours." I leaned back slowly, the air leaving my lungs. "So, it's real." "It's real," Victor confirmed. "Every penny." He slid the top document toward me. A ledger, neat rows of numbers and bank logos, followed by a line that made my brain stutter. Total estimated value, $47,320,000 US. My hand went numb holding the page. I'd spent months looking for a dollar, I murmured, almost to myself. Suddenly, I'm drowning in millions. Victor's eyes softened. "I imagine that's quite the adjustment." "Adjustment?" I laughed quietly, shaking my head. "I don't even know what to do with this information." "Buy a meal? A house? A soul?" He didn't reply immediately, just studied me, calm and unflinching. "It's not about what you do next," he said finally. "It's about who you become next." The words hung between us like smoke. He walked me through everything. Trust funds under my name. A sprawling estate in upstate New York, a property I didn't even know existed. 3 investment accounts. 2 smaller properties in Florida. An offshore holding that generated monthly dividends larger than what I used to earn in a year. It was too much, too fast. Each signature felt like a dream I wasn't meant to touch. My hand trembled slightly every time I wrote my name. Michael Rains. Michael Rains. Michael Rains. I'd signed my name before. On bills, on job applications, on the divorce papers that tore my life apart. But never like this. Never as someone who owned anything worth having. When it was done, Victor closed the folder, satisfied. That concludes the formalities. The estate will transfer fully within 5 business days. You'll receive account details and keys once final verification clears. Keys? I echoed. To the properties, he said. And to the vehicles. I blinked. Vehicles? He smiled slightly. Yes. Your uncle had a fondness for cars. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh again. A few weeks ago, I was counting coins for gas. Now I apparently owned cars I hadn't even seen. Victor, I said quietly, what would you do if you were me? He tilted his head. That depends. Do you want to disappear or start over? The question hit harder than I expected. I don't know yet, I admitted. Maybe both. He nodded thoughtfully. Then take your time. Money changes circumstances, not souls. Give yourself room to breathe. Room to breathe. I looked around, the clean lobby, the morning light, the ordinary hum of people who didn't know their worlds could turn upside down overnight, and I realized I hadn't breathed freely in years. After Victor left, I went back upstairs. I didn't know what to do with myself. There was no plan for what happens after surviving. The room felt too quiet, too big. So I did the only thing that made sense. I turned to the mirror again. Same man. Same tired eyes. But something was different this time. The weight wasn't gone, but it had shifted. For months, my reflection had been a punishment, a reminder of every failure, every mistake. Now it was a question. A possibility. Who are you now, Michael? I whispered. The man in the mirror didn't know yet. But he didn't look away either. I ran my hand along the counter, touched the cool glass, and felt a strange ache rise in my chest. Gratitude, maybe. Or fear. Or both. Somewhere deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Money might have changed the story, but it hadn't changed the storyteller. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the ocean, replaying every moment of the past 24 hours like it was a film. Victor's calm voice. The papers. The signatures. The check. My uncle's name written beside mine. $47 million. The number was so large it didn't even feel real. Like trying to measure infinity in teaspoons. I thought of all the things I could do. Help shelters, rebuild what I'd lost, find people who'd fallen the way I had and give them something to hold on to. And then just as quickly, the darker thoughts crept in. Leora. Would she find out? Would she come back pretending to care? I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. No, that part of my life was over. This time, I would build something that couldn't be taken. Sometime past midnight, I got up again and stood by the window. The ocean shimmered silver under the moonlight. Cars whispered along the coastal road below, their headlights brief and distant. I pressed my palm against the glass. For months, I've been chasing survival. Just enough food, enough warmth, enough reasons to keep moving. Now I had more than enough, and it terrified me. Because money couldn't give me back what I'd lost. Not the marriage, not the years, not the man I used to be. But maybe, just maybe, it could give me a chance to find something new. Not to forget, but to begin again. The mirror caught my reflection one last time before I turned away. The man staring back still had scars in his eyes, shadows beneath the surface. But for the first time, he didn't look like he was waiting for someone to save him. He looked like he might save himself. The morning came gray and restless, a sky the color of unpolished silver. Victor called just after dawn. It's time, he said simply. By 8, we were on the road. The drive north stretched for hours, the city shrinking behind us as the world widened to rolling fields and wooded hills. Every mile carried a strange weight, like crossing invisible borders between who I'd been and who I might become. Victor drove in silence, his focus unshakable, his profile calm against the passing blur of landscape. I stared out the window, watching rain gather in streaks on the glass. I tried to imagine the mansion, the estate of a man I barely remembered but now somehow belonged to me. Each guess fell short. The word mansion didn't feel real in my mouth. When the iron gates finally appeared tall and ornate, they looked like something from another century. A weathered plaque on the stone column read Rains Estate, EST 1894. Victor keyed a code into the intercom. The gates opened with a slow, almost reluctant groan. Beyond them, a long driveway coiled through trees heavy with mist, the branches bowing inward like they were keeping secrets. And then, through the fog, I saw it. The house. Sprawling. Silent. Unbelievable. It wasn't just big. It was old money big. The kind of house that remembered every footstep, every whisper. Its windows were tall and clouded, its stone walls streaked with age. Ivy crawled up one side, gripping the stone like a memory that refused to let go. As we pulled up to the front steps, I felt something deep in my chest, a tremor between awe and grief. This was his. I asked quietly. Victor nodded. For over 30 years. He lived here alone after your father cut contact. Alone. The word hung in the damp air heavy. The front door creaked open when Victor turned the key. The scent of dust and wood polish hit first. The time capsule sealed too long. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, scattering fragments of color across the marble floor. Every sound seemed to echo. The distant tick of a grandfather clock, the low hum of old electricity running through veins of copper. I stepped inside slowly, afraid to disturb it. Take your time, Victor said. The estate staff haven't returned since his passing. It's as he left it. He disappeared into another room, making calls, leaving me alone with the silence. I wandered. Every hallway was lined with framed photographs, black and white and fading. A young Sebastian shaking hands with business partners. Sebastian beside my father, before things fell apart, both smiling, full of promise. There was something unbearable about seeing them frozen together like that. The last time I'd seen my father alive, he couldn't even say Sebastian's name without bitterness. Yet here, their youth hung on the wall, untouched by hate or time. I found the study at the end of the West Hall. The door was half open, and the air inside was different, denser, as if the room still held its owner's breath. Bookshelves towered against every wall, filled with leather spines and dust. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk, an old fountain pen resting beside them. A single photograph faced the chair, Sebastian standing beside my parents at a family barbecue, long before I was born. The frame was cracked, but the faces were smiling. I don't know how long I stood there. Then, on the desk, I noticed a small wooden box. It was plain, unadorned, but my name was carved faintly into the lid. Michael. My heartbeat stumbled. I lifted the latch. Inside, there were envelopes, dozens of them, age-sealed, all addressed in the same looping handwriting. To Michael. To my nephew. To the boy I never got to know. My throat tightened as I unfolded the first letter, dated 15 years ago. Michael. You were 14 the last time I saw your photograph. Your father didn't send it to me, of course. I found it through a mutual friend. You looked like him, but your eyes were your mother's. I wanted to write to you then, but I didn't. Pride is a foolish thing. I read another, written years later. I saw your college graduation notice. You probably don't know this, but I covered your final semester's fees anonymously. I wasn't trying to buy forgiveness. I just wanted to keep you moving forward. Another. You were the only one in this family who never asked for money. That's why I wanted you to have it. By the time I reached the last letter, my hands were trembling. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I can only hope you found this before the world had the chance to twist it into something ugly. This fortune, what's left of it, is not payment, not redemption. It's a door. You decide whether to open it. Tears blurred the words. I set the letter down carefully, afraid the paper might crumble under the weight of my hands. He'd been there all along, watching, quietly, waiting for me to forgive him without even knowing what for. And I, too proud, too wounded by the past that wasn't even mine, had never reached out. Victor found me there an hour later, sitting on the floor beside the desk, The letters spread around me like the fragments of a life I'd never lived. He didn't ask questions. Just waited, patient as always. He wrote to me. I said finally. My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. All these years. Letters he never sent. Victor nodded slowly. He wasn't an easy man, Mr. Rains. But I believe he wanted peace at the end. I looked at the last letter again. The words "you decide whether to open it" burned through me. I think he wanted me to forgive him, I whispered. Perhaps, Victor said. Or perhaps he wanted you to forgive yourself. The silence between us felt sacred. Later, we walked through the rest of the house. The library, the sunroom, the upstairs hall that smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Every room told a story of absence. There were coffee rings on the desk, half-filled journals, and one bedroom door kept closed, a nameplate still fixed to it, Sebastian. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I wandered to the balcony overlooking the gardens. The air outside was sharp, filled with the scent of wet leaves and memory. From up there, this state looked endless. A kingdom of ghosts. And for the first time since Victor had found me, I understood what this inheritance really was. Not money. Not luxury. It was penance. His and mine. That night, I stayed in one of the guest rooms. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in his bed. The house felt too alive for that, like it might start speaking if I closed my eyes too long. The letters lay on the nightstand beside me, the ink still smudged where my tears had fallen. I thought about what Victor had said, that maybe this wasn't about forgiveness at all, but about learning to live again. Maybe Sebastian had seen something in me I couldn't see myself. The same stubborn pride that ruined him, but also the same capacity to rebuild. I turned off the lamp and stared into the dark. In the silence, I could almost hear him, the uncle I barely knew, the man who haunted my family's stories, speaking softly from somewhere beyond time. You were the only one who never asked for money. That's why I wanted you to have it. Guilt pressed heavy against my ribs, but beneath it was something else, something fragile, glowing faintly in the dark. Gratitude. I didn't sleep much that night. But when dawn came through the curtains, warm and quiet, I felt something new stir inside me. A strange, aching peace. The kind that comes not from answers, but from finally letting the questions rest. I thought money would silence the world. Turns out, it just changes the pitch of the noise. It started small. A few missed calls. Then texts from numbers I didn't recognize. Hey, Mike, long time no see. Or, bro, remember me from college? I ignored them at first. But then the messages grew bolder, the voices louder, and the ghosts I'd buried started clawing their way back into the daylight. And then Leora, I should have known she'd find me eventually. She always did, especially when there was something to gain. She showed up at the mansion gate one evening, rain running down her face, mascara streaked, a shivering figure wrapped in a beige coat far too thin for November. The guard called me, hesitant. Sir, there's a woman here. She says she's your ex-wife. For a long time, I didn't answer. Then I told him, let her in. When the car rolled through the gates, I stood in the doorway of that vast, empty house, Sebastian's house, and felt something between dread and curiosity twist inside me. She stepped out, slow and unsure, clutching her purse like it held the last piece of her pride. Michael, she said softly, her voice trembling. Hearing my name from her lips again felt strange, like hearing a song you used to love but no longer recognize. I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between us, thick as fog. Finally, I said, you look different. She smiled faintly, eyes wet. So, do you? You look happy. Happy. Funny word, that. She walked closer. I saw the news. About your uncle. About the inheritance. Of course, she had. Money has a way of finding its way into headlines, and into the hearts of people who never noticed you before. I just wanted to see you, she continued. To say I'm sorry for everything. I watched her closely. The way her fingers fidgeted. The way her eyes darted around the foyer like she was cataloging every piece of furniture. She wasn't here for closure. She was here for a miracle. Her words spilled faster. I made mistakes, Michael. I didn't realize what I had, what you were. I thought I wanted stability, but she stopped herself, wiping her cheek. Now I see how wrong I was. The irony nearly made me laugh. Now she saw. Now that her new husband's company had gone under, that the man she'd left me for had gambled away their savings. Karma doesn't always knock loudly, but when it does, it makes sure you hear it. I stepped aside. You can come in if you want to dry off. The staff can bring you tea. Her face lit up with relief. But I added quietly, that's all. She hesitated, then nodded. We sat in the grand hall, where portraits of people long dead stared down at us. I watched her hands wrap around the steaming cup, trembling slightly. For a moment, I remembered what it was like to love her, to believe she was home. Then I remembered the day she walked out, the way she took not just the furniture or the car, but the version of me that still believed in forever. Michael, she whispered, I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I was scared. You lost your job. You were shutting me out. I didn't know how to fix it. I interrupted gently. You didn't try to fix it, Leora. You replaced it. She winced. I'm sorry, she said again. I nodded slowly. I know. For a long moment, we sat in silence. The sound of rain against the windows was the only witness. Finally, she said, could we start over? Maybe dinner sometime, just to talk. I looked at her. The woman who once promised me forever, but couldn't stay through failure. I thought about all the nights I'd spent in that truck, wondering if I'd ever be seen again. And I realized I didn't hate her anymore. I just didn't need her. I stood. You left me when I was invisible, I said softly. Don't come back now that I'm seen. She froze, eyes glistening. So that's it. I nodded. That's peace, Leora. That's all that's left. She left quietly. Her car's headlights faded into the fog, leaving the mansion in darkness again. Later that week, more people came back. Friends who disappeared when things got hard suddenly wanted to catch up. Old coworkers congratulated me on pulling through. Even distant relatives who never sent a card when my father died now wanted to reconnect over lunch. I smiled, nodded, played polite, but I saw through them. Money had made me visible again, but not valuable. That night, as I sat alone in the study, Sebastian's last letter still resting on the desk, I read his words again. The world worships gold, but it doesn't understand it. Gold only reflects. It never creates light. Find your own. I closed the letter, staring into the darkness. Maybe this was my real inheritance. Not the money, not the mansion, but the chance to start seeing people for who they were, and myself for who I could still become. And for the first time since the black car stopped by that diner, I felt something close to peace, quiet, cautious, but real. I hadn't driven down that street in almost a year. Back when I last saw it, winter had been gnawing at my bones, and I was just another shadow walking between streetlights, anonymous, cold, and hungry. Now, the same block looked smaller somehow, cleaner. But maybe that was just me. Standing here with a full stomach and the keys to a mansion I still didn't feel at home in. The shelter sat at the end of the block, a squat brick building with faded blue trim and a sagging banner that read Hope Haven Community Center. I used to sleep inside on the coldest nights, tucked into a corner near the back where the floor didn't creak as loudly. The cot had smelled faintly of disinfectant and something sweet, maybe the oatmeal they serve in the mornings. I parked a few spaces down. My car was too new, too polished. It looked wrong here. So I stepped out quietly, pulling a plain gray hoodie over my shirt. I didn't want to stand out. I just wanted to remember. Inside, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of soup. Volunteers moved between tables, stacking bowls, carrying trays, greeting the line of men and women who shuffled in from the cold. No one looked at me twice, and I was grateful for that. I approached the reception desk where a tired-looking young man was sorting paperwork. Evening, I said softly. Is the director around? He glanced up. You mean Clara? She's somewhere in the kitchen. Clara. I hadn't said her name aloud in months. When I was living here, she was the one who always noticed the quiet ones, the men who didn't ask for seconds, or the women who cried without making a sound. She had a way of seeing you without pity, and that was rarer than kindness. I left a sealed envelope on the counter. No name, just a note. For repairs, food, and warmth. From someone who once found both here. Inside were cashier's checks worth $500,000. I didn't plan to stay. I just wanted to leave it behind and walk out before anyone connected the dots. But then, as I turned to go, I heard her voice. Michael. I froze. She stood in the doorway leading from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, her dark hair tied loosely at the back. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, catching the faint smile that spread across her face. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that smile until now. "Clara," I said, trying to sound casual. "Hey." She stepped closer, studying me. "It is you." I wasn't sure. You look different." "I finally found a razor," I joked, rubbing my chin. She laughed softly. "And a shower by the smell of it." "That's progress." The warmth in her tone melted something inside me. For a second, I was back in those long nights when she'd hand me extra coffee and tell me the world wasn't done with me yet. She used to believe that for me when I couldn't. "What are you doing back here?" she asked. "Not that I'm complaining. It's just you vanished." "I moved around," I said. "Try to get back on my feet." Her eyes brightened. "And did you?" "Yeah," I said after a pause. "I think I did." She tilted her head, searching my face. Maybe she sensed there was more to it, but she didn't press. Clara was like that. She waited for stories to unfold on their own. She motioned toward the dining area. "Come on. We're short on hands tonight." "If you're staying, you're working." I smiled. Some things never change. Exactly. The kitchen was a flurry of movement, steam rising from pots, the clatter of ladles, the hum of conversation. A few volunteers eyed me curiously as I tied on an apron, but Clara just handed me a tray of bread rolls and pointed to the serving line. I fell into rhythm. Quickly. Soup, roll, smile, repeat. And somehow it felt grounding. Real. The line moved slowly, a parade of faces that looked like my reflection from a year ago. Some were gaunt and tired, others cracked jokes between bites. I caught a few familiar faces, men who had shared cigarettes in silence with me behind the dumpsters during winter nights. Most didn't recognize me. A few squinted like they almost did, but my cleaned-up face and steady hands didn't fit their memories. And that was okay. I didn't come back to be remembered. I came back to remember. When the line thinned, Clara leaned against the counter beside me, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "So," she said, "what's your story now?" I shrugged, pretending to study the soup pot. "Same story, maybe just a different chapter." She smiled. "You're smiling different these days." I looked at her, genuinely surprised. "What do you mean?" "It's not forced anymore," she said. "Back then, you smiled like you were apologizing for it. Now it's peaceful." I felt something tighten in my throat. Maybe I finally remembered who I am. Clara nodded slowly, as if she understood more than I'd said. "That's a good thing to remember." For a while, we just worked in silence. It was the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. When the last plates were stacked and the chairs folded, she sat across from me at one of the tables, holding 2 mugs of lukewarm coffee. "You know," she said, "I used to worry about you. The night you left, you didn't say goodbye. I didn't think I'd come back," I admitted. "Most don't," she said softly. "They move on. Or they disappear." I did both. She studied me again, her gaze searching. "You did well, didn't you?" I hesitated. "Define well." Her eyes narrowed playfully. "The kind of well that explains why you're wearing shoes that actually fit." I chuckled. "Maybe." She grinned. "Don't worry, I'm not prying. I'm just glad you're okay." There was something disarming about her simplicity. She didn't ask about my past, my wealth, or where I lived now. She just saw me. And for the first time since inheriting everything, I didn't feel like a headline. I felt human again. Later, after the lights dimmed and the volunteers left, I stepped outside. The night air bit against my skin, sharp but familiar. Clara followed me to the doorway, arms crossed against the chill. "Leaving already?" she asked. "Yeah. I just wanted to see the place." She looked at me, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You should come back sometime. Not as a guest, just come back." "I will." As I walked toward my car, I heard her call out, "Michael." I turned. "Whatever you're doing now," she said softly, "keep doing it." "You look alive." I nodded. "You too, Clara." And as I drove away, I glanced in the mirror at the faint silhouette of the shelter fading into the night and realized that for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a man running from his past. I felt like someone finally walking towards something real. 3 days later, I found myself driving back to Hope Haven. I told myself it was to check if the repairs had started, to make sure the donation reached them, But if I was honest, it was because of Clara. Something about her steadiness lingered with me, like a melody you can't shake even when the song ends. The world I lived in now, marble floors, glass walls, polished smiles, was louder, emptier. But at the shelter, everything was real. Chipped tiles, tired faces, laughter that came from places deeper than comfort. When I arrived, the place was buzzing. A truck was parked out front, workers unloading boxes of canned food and insulation panels. The roof, which had been leaking last winter, was already half repaired. Clara stood in the courtyard, clipboard in hand, giving directions like a commander in a kind war. She spotted me and waved. "Back so soon? I figured you'd need another pair of hands," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Or maybe you missed our gourmet soup." I grinned. "That too." She tossed me a pair of gloves. "Come on then. We're fixing the back fence today. You still remember how to use a hammer?" "Barely." The hours passed easily. We worked side by side, patching broken boards, painting over graffiti, and talking between strokes of the brush. Clara told me about the people who came and went, the ones who got jobs, those who relapsed, and the few who never made it back. She spoke with tenderness, not pity. "I used to think helping meant saving everyone," she said, leaning against the fence, sipping from her water bottle. "Now I just try to remind them they're still human. Sometimes that's enough." I nodded slowly. "Yeah. Sometimes all we need is one person to look at us like we still matter." She smiled faintly. "That's what you needed back then, wasn't it?" "Yeah, I admit it. And you gave me that. You just didn't know what it meant at the time." Clara's expression softened. "I did. I've seen that look before, the one that says, 'I'm done.' You didn't have it when you walked out of here, though. You had something else." "What's that?" "Hope," she said simply. Her words hit deeper than I expected. I looked down, pretending to study the paintbrush, but my chest felt tight. Hope, it had been such a fragile thing once. A flicker I almost let die. We finished just before sunset. The light washed the courtyard in gold, the kind that makes even broken things look beautiful. Clara turned to me, streaks of paint on her hands and a quiet pride in her eyes. "Not bad for a day's work," she said. "Not bad at all." As we locked up, I noticed a group of men coming down the street, new arrivals. One of them stopped when he saw me. His name was Ray. We'd shared a bench once when I had nowhere to go. "Mike," he said, eyes wide. "Is that you?" I hesitated. "Hey, Ray." "Man, I thought you were dead," he laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. "Look at you. You look like—" He stopped himself, taking the clean clothes, the truck keys in my hand. Clara's eyes flicked to me, curious. Ray shook his head, smiling. "Guess you got out, huh? Good for you." "Yeah," I said quietly. "Guess I did." He nodded, the kind of nod that carried no jealousy, just weary pride. "You always had something in you, Mike. Some of us just ran out of chances." I pressed a folded bill into his hand discreetly. "Dinner's on me tonight." He started to protest, but I cut him off. "It's just food, Ray. Take it." He smiled, eyes glassy. "Thanks, man. You don't forget, do you?" "Never." When he walked away, Clara looked at me. "He knows you," she said softly. "Yeah. We used to trade stories for coffee." She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. There was a quiet understanding in her gaze, one that didn't pry, didn't judge, just saw. "Whoever you were before," she said, "you've turned it into something good." I swallowed hard. "I'm trying." That night, after I drove home, I stood by the window of Sebastian's study, looking out over the empty estate. I thought about the shelter's cracked walls and the laughter that somehow filled them. About Clara's hands, steady even when the world around her wasn't. For the first time, I realized wealth hadn't changed me. It had only removed the noise so I could finally hear what mattered. And somewhere deep down, I knew I'd be back. Not because I owed them, but because being there made me feel like the man Sebastian hoped I'd become. I started going back every week, sometimes to help paint walls, sometimes to fix leaks, and sometimes just to sit with people who needed someone to listen. No cameras, no headlines, no suits, just work, sweat, and silence. Clara never asked where I came from or what I did for a living. She didn't seem to care. She only cared that I showed up. Some nights, when the shelter was quiet, we'd stay behind in the kitchen with mugs of instant cocoa. She'd hum softly while stacking dishes, and I'd find myself watching her, feeling a strange calm settle over me, the kind that doesn't shout but whispers, "You're safe here." One night, she caught me staring. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Nothing. Just," I hesitated. "You remind me of something I forgot existed." "What's that?" "Good people." She laughed, shaking her head. "Don't idealize me, Michael. I'm just a woman trying to keep a roof from leaking and a few stomachs full." "Exactly," I said. "That's the kind of heroism people write poems about." She rolled her eyes, but there was warmth behind it. The weeks turned into a rhythm: shelter days, estate nights. During the day, I was surrounded by marble and glass, lawyers and accountants talking in circles about portfolios and trust returns. But at night, I was back under flickering fluorescent lights, surrounded by chipped bowls and laughter that came from people with nothing left to lose. It was in that contrast that I found balance. One Friday, Clara asked if I could help organize a small event, a community dinner for donors and volunteers. "We barely have enough to cover heating next month," she said, flipping through her worn ledger. "If we can get a few local sponsors, we'll survive winter." "Count me in," I said quickly. "Great. Just wear something normal," she teased. "You tend to overdress for soup kitchens." I laughed. Noted. The night of the dinner, the shelter was transformed. String lights hung across the hall, the air smelled of roasted vegetables and cinnamon, and the walls glowed with warmth they'd never known before. I wore a simple black sweater and jeans. Still, Clara smirked when she saw me. Normal enough. As guests arrived, I stood to the side, content to blend into the crowd. It was strange watching people praise her, calling her selfless, inspiring, a miracle worker. Every compliment felt right. She deserved all of it. At one point, a local journalist approached her for an interview. Clara looked flustered but handled it gracefully. When they asked where most of their funding came from, she hesitated. "We have some generous anonymous donors," she said carefully. "People who understand that a second chance can start with a warm bed." Her eyes flicked to me briefly, not as a question, but as a quiet acknowledgement. When the guests left and the lights dimmed, we stayed behind cleaning up. She leaned against the counter, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. "You did good tonight," she said. "So did you." She smiled tiredly. "Sometimes I wish we could keep this feeling bottled. No, that sense that people care." "You can," I said softly. "You just have to remind them they can still be kind." Clara studied me then, her expression softening into something curious. "You talk like someone who's lived both sides of the story." I hesitated. The truth hovered on the tip of my tongue. The inheritance, the mansion, the millions I hadn't even touched yet. I wanted to tell her. Not to impress her, but to stop pretending. But then she added quietly, "You don't have to explain. I see it in your eyes. Whatever you've been through, it didn't break you. It just changed the way you love." Her words rooted me to the floor. Maybe that was the moment I started falling for her, not because she saw who I'd become, but because she saw who I'd been and didn't look away. When I left that night, the cold air bit through my sweater, but I didn't feel it. My heart was too full, too alive. Driving home, I thought about Sebastian again. His letters, his warnings. Gold reflects, it doesn't shine on its own. Clara was the opposite of gold. She was light, the kind that didn't need reflection to exist. I began wondering if this was what my uncle meant all along. That wealth isn't measured in numbers, but in what you choose to give light to. It happened on a Sunday morning. Clara was arranging canned goods when her coworker, Jonah, came rushing in with a folded newspaper. "You won't believe this," he said, grinning. "Remember that guy who's been coming by to fix the pipes and serve dinner? The quiet one with the good posture." "Michael?" she asked absently, still stacking boxes. Jonah spread the paper across the counter. There it was, a small business section headline. Reclusive heir Michael Rains inherits $47 million estate from late investor Sebastian Rains. Clara froze. Her hand stopped midair. For a second, the world tilted. "Wait," she whispered. No. It can't be the same person." Jonah laughed. "Looks like your handyman's actually a millionaire. You think he's doing charity work for a tax write-off?" She said nothing, but something inside her twisted. When Michael arrived later that afternoon, he carried a box of brand-new winter coats for the shelter residents. He noticed the air felt different, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace but from something heavy, unsaid. Clara greeted him with her usual smile, but it was faint, careful. "Hey," he said softly. "You okay?" She nodded. "Yeah, just tired. Long day." But he could see the paper on the desk behind her, folded neatly, his own name visible in the headline. He sighed, the truth finally catching up to him. "Clara," he began, "I was going to tell you." She didn't let him finish. "You don't owe me an explanation." "I do," he said firmly. "Because I didn't want you to find out like this." She looked at him for a long time, searching his face. "All this time, you were the man from the article." "There." "Yes," he said quietly. "But I'm still the man who walked through those doors with nothing." "I didn't lie. I just didn't know how to make it make sense." She turned away, her voice breaking. "You made me believe you understood. That you were one of us." "I was one of you," he said, stepping closer. "And maybe a part of me still is." She let out a soft, bitter laugh. "You say that, but you drive away every night in a car I could never afford. You donate more in a month than I make in a year. You don't belong here, Michael. Not anymore." He shook his head. "That's not true. I belong where people are real. That's why I came back." "Then why hide it?" "Because every time people find out, they change. They start measuring you in zeros instead of heartbeats." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "Maybe I already did." He looked at her then, really looked. The woman who gave him food when he was invisible. The one who laughed like she'd never been hurt, even though she had. "Clara," he said softly, "you're the only person who saw me before the money came back. That's why I stayed. Because with you, I wasn't a man with a past or a fortune. I was just me." The silence that followed was heavy, fragile. She crossed her arms, staring at the floor. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," he whispered. "Just don't walk away." But she did, not dramatically, not with anger, just a quiet step back, a whispered, "I need time," and the sound of her footsteps fading into the hall. Michael stood there for a long while, surrounded by the soft hum of the shelter, laughter from the dining area, clinking dishes, the shuffle of people lining up for dinner. He realized then that sometimes the cruelest punishment wasn't rejection. It was distance from the only person who made you feel human again. That night, back in the mansion, he sat in his uncle's old study, staring at the rows of untouched books and the silent piano in the corner. The house echoed with emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. On the desk lay one of Sebastian's letters he hadn't opened yet. He tore it open with trembling hands. "If you're reading this, you've learned what power looks like. Be careful, Michael. Money doesn't corrupt the heart. It reveals what's already hiding inside it. The real inheritance is not what I left in the bank, but what you decide to keep in your soul." Michael leaned back, exhaling slowly. He understood now. Clara wasn't angry because of who he was. She was hurt because she thought he'd forgotten why he came back. And maybe for a moment he had days past. And for the first time since inheriting his uncle's fortune, Michael felt poor again, not in his wallet, but in his chest. He threw himself into work. Meetings, charity boards, estate paperwork, all the things that made him look like a man who had finally made it. But inside, he knew something had gone missing the moment Clara turned away. He tried visiting the shelter twice that week. Each time, he parked outside, engine idling, watching the volunteers go in and out. But she wasn't there. He'd almost given up when one evening Jonah, the same volunteer who'd shown Clara the newspaper, called him. "Michael," Jonah said, his voice low, "I thought you should know. The shelter's in trouble. The landlord's selling the building. We've got a month to clear out." Michael's fingers tightened around the phone. "What about Clara?" "She's fighting it," Jonah replied. "She's been going door to door, trying to raise donations. But we both know she can't do it alone." The next morning, Michael arrived at the shelter early, before dawn. The parking lot was empty except for Clara's rusted hatchback. He found her inside, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stacks of donation forms and empty coffee cups. "Clara," he said softly. She didn't look up right away. When she did, her eyes were tired but steady. "I was wondering when you'd show up. I heard about this sale." "Of course you did." Her tone wasn't sharp, just weary. "What are you here for, Michael?" "To buy the place and put your name on the door." He stepped closer. "No, I'm here to help you save it your way." She arched an eyebrow. "And what does that mean?" It means I'll pay what needs paying, but you decide what happens next. The programs, the space, the people, they're yours to lead. I don't want control. I just don't want this place to disappear. Clara stared at him, searching for the catch. Why? He swallowed hard. Because this place saved me. And because I owe you more than you'll ever know. She looked away then, her voice quieter. You don't owe me anything, Michael. You just forgot that people can love you for reasons that have nothing to do with what you can give. I'm learning, he said gently. Maybe this is how I start proving it. The next weeks blurred into motion. Michael used his influence quietly, not as the millionaire heir, but as Mike, the guy who fixed the pipes and served soup. He called in favors from contractors he'd met through the foundation, found a lawyer willing to negotiate with the landlord, and quietly paid off the debts under a discreet LLC. Clara worked beside him every day, stubbornly independent but slowly softening. She organized fundraisers, filed permits, and handled the endless line of people needing warmth and food. One night, after a long day of painting the shelter's new walls, they stood outside under the soft yellow light of the entrance. Clara leaned against the railing, arms folded. You really did it, you know. Save the place. Michael smiled faintly. We did it. She tilted her head, her gaze softer now. You could have just written a check and left. Maybe, he said. But then I'd never have earned back what I almost lost. Her lips curved into a small, tired smile. And what's that? He met her eyes. You. The silence that followed was gentle this time, not awkward, not heavy, but full of something quietly alive. She reached out, brushing a streak of paint from his cheek. You're still terrible at shaving, she said. He laughed, a deep, real laugh he hadn't heard from himself in years. A few days later, the shelter reopened under a new name, Sebastian's Place. Clara had chosen it. When he asked her why, she said, because second chances shouldn't end with one person. On the first night of reopening, Michael stood by the door, greeting guests as the smell of warm soup filled the air. He looked around, the same hall, the same tables, yet everything felt different, fuller. At the far end, Clara handed out bowls to the guests, laughing with them, her eyes catching the light just right. Michael thought about all he'd lost, his marriage, his pride, his old identity, and realized none of it compared to what he'd found in this simple, crowded room. He remembered something his uncle had written. Money can build walls or bridges. Only one will lead you home. And as Clara looked up, meeting his gaze across the room, he smiled. Because for the first time since his world had collapsed, he finally knew which one he'd built. I used to think silence was the sound of peace. Now I know it's what comes right before the storm. For weeks after the shelter reopened, my life felt almost balanced. I spent my mornings at Sebastian's Place and my afternoons sorting through estate documents with Victor Hale, the attorney who'd found me in that diner months ago. He'd become more than a lawyer, almost a guide, the one person who seemed unimpressed by my fortune. But even he looked uneasy the morning he came to my study with a folder marked urgent. Michael, he said quietly, we have a situation. I was still in jeans and a worn flannel, halfway through my first cup of coffee. That's never how I like a conversation to start. He set the folder on the table between us. Your uncle's relatives. The distant ones, third cousins, nieces through marriage, people you've never met, they filed a petition in court. They're contesting the will. I blinked. On what grounds? Fraud, Victor said simply. They claimed the will was forged and that you manipulated Sebastian during his last months. I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. Manipulated. I hadn't seen the man in decades. They're arguing that you re-established contact and took advantage of his condition. They have a few dubious witnesses willing to testify. The laughter in my throat turned to acid. Let me guess, witnesses who can't spell my name but know the scent of money. Victor didn't smile. They've hired an aggressive law firm. They'll go public soon. And they did. Within 48 hours, my name was plastered across headlines again. This time, I wasn't the reclusive heir or the quiet philanthropist. I was the suspect nephew. Pundits debated my sincerity. Old acquaintances from high school suddenly remembered anecdotes that painted me in shades of greed. Even my ex-wife Leora appeared in interviews, hair perfectly styled, voice trembling just enough for sympathy. He always resented people who had more, she said into a camera. Maybe inheriting that money just brought out what was already there. I turned off the TV before she could finish. Victor kept me steady. We met daily in his office, surrounded by papers, stamps, the dry smell of ink and old ambition. "They'll want to rattle you," he said. "Stay quiet publicly. Let the evidence speak." But silence was harder this time. It wasn't the silence of losing everything. It was the silence of being misrepresented, of watching strangers narrate your life while you could correct them. Clara tried to keep me grounded. She'd stopped by the mansion with sandwiches one afternoon, insisting that I eat like a human, not a ghost. She didn't talk about the case unless I did. She'd just sit across from me and listen, her calm steadier than any court document. "You've already survived worse," she reminded me one night. "You were homeless. You've known what it's like to have nothing. These people," she shook her head, "they're just noise. But noise can still hurt when it's everywhere." The first court day came in early spring. The courthouse smelled of disinfectant and marble, the way all places of judgment do. I wore a plain gray suit. No luxury, no watch, just the version of me that existed before wealth had touched my name. The opposing counsel, a sharp-faced man named Leeds, smirked as we took our seats. His clients, those relatives, sat behind him in expensive mourning black, as though they'd just lost Sebastian yesterday instead of ignoring him for decades. Leeds began with theatrics. "Your Honor," he said, voice smooth as oil, "we have reason to believe Mr. Michael Raines coerced his uncle during a period of mental decline. This so-called generosity is, in truth, theft cloaked as inheritance." I'd expected anger. Instead, I felt strangely calm, like someone watching a movie about his own life. My lawyer spoke next, Victor, concise and shaken. "We will demonstrate that every claim made here is baseless. The evidence will show Sebastian Raines made his own decisions, lucidly and willingly." Day after day, the proceedings unfolded like slow torture. Leeds paraded witnesses, a former housekeeper who claimed Sebastian talked to shadows, a banker who insisted he'd once seen me near Sebastian's estate long before the will was signed. Lies, half-truths, warped memories, all of it polished into performance. Then came the twist I should have seen coming. Leora. When the bailiff called her name, the air left my lungs. She walked in wearing somber colors, pretending humility. Her new husband's bankruptcy had driven her into a quiet panic, and apparently desperation found her a new script. Leeds smiled. "Mrs. Leora Dane, you were once married to the defendant, correct?" "Yes," she said softly. "For 10 years. Would you say he was capable of deception?" She hesitated just long enough to seem pained. "I loved him once. But Michael always had a complicated relationship with honesty." My jaw tightened. Victor leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't react. Let her hang herself with her own words." Leeds pressed further. "Did he ever mention his uncle?" "Not until recently," she said. "But he always dreamed of money. He blamed others for his failures. I think if he saw an opportunity, he'd take it, no matter the cost." When she stepped down, she didn't look at me. Maybe she couldn't. Or maybe she didn't care. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window of my study, rain streaking down the glass. The city lights blurred into soft ghosts. For a moment, I saw the man I used to be, the one sleeping in his truck, believing the world had forgotten him. That man had no money, no power, no voice. But he had something the millionaire version of me had lost along the way: clarity. I whispered to the reflection, "You already survived being nothing. Don't let them take who you became." The following week, it was our turn to speak. Victor called a small list of witnesses: Sebastian's nurse, the notary, and a financial advisor who'd worked with my uncle for 20 years. Each testified that Sebastian had been of sound mind, and that his instructions were deliberate. Then Victor played a video. I hadn't known it existed. The screen flickered, and there was Sebastian, older, thinner, but unmistakably sharp-eyed. He sat at his desk, the same room I'd first walked into months ago. "If you're watching this," he began, "I assume someone's questioning my sanity. Let me save the court some time. I am perfectly aware of what I'm doing. I leave my estate to my nephew, Michael Raines, not because of blood, but because he understands the value of starting over. Everyone else already spent their inheritance long before I died." The courtroom fell silent. Even Leeds seemed to lose color. Victor paused the video and looked at the judge. "We rest our case." Still, the trial dragged on, motions, counterclaims, the machinery of law grinding against truth. I learned patience in those days. Every time anger bubbled up, I reminded myself of what I'd told Liara once. You left me when I was invisible. Don't come back now that I'm seen. The day of closing arguments, the courtroom was full. Reporters lined the back wall. Clara sat quietly near the aisle, hands folded, her presence a calm anchor in the noise. Leeds spoke first, painting me as a manipulative drifter who'd lucked into a dying man's favor. Then Victor stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Your Honor, he began, we've heard a lot about what Mr. Raines supposedly is. A liar, an opportunist. But not once have we heard what he actually did. He didn't pressure anyone. He didn't demand anything. He didn't even know about the will until my office found him, homeless, hungry, and without a single reason to believe the world owed him kindness. This inheritance wasn't theft. It was recognition. Sebastian Raines chose to reward the one person who never asked him for anything. The law can argue about signatures and dates, but cannot legislate integrity, and integrity, Your Honor, is exactly what my client has shown since the day he lost everything. When he finished, the courtroom was silent again. The verdict came a week later. I stood in the same courtroom, palms sweating though my face stayed still. The judge adjusted his glasses, shuffled his papers, and finally spoke. After reviewing the evidence, this court finds no indication of fraud or coercion. The will of Sebastian Raines is valid. Case dismissed. There was a collective exhale. My knees almost buckled. Victor gripped my shoulder. It's over. But he was wrong. It wasn't over. Not really. Because in the echo of that gavel, I realized something. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. The kind of freedom that comes only after you've stopped fighting to prove who you are. Outside, reporters swarmed like crows, shouting questions. I walked straight through them. The cameras flashed. Microphones followed my steps. One reporter yelled, Mr. Raines, any comment on your win? I stopped just long enough to say, I lost everything once. I won't lose myself again. Then I kept walking. Clara was waiting by her car. When she saw me, she smiled, a small, proud smile that said, You did it. Coffee, she asked. Always, I said. We drove away, the courthouse shrinking behind us in the mirror. That night, we sat in the quiet corner of a small diner, the same one where Victor had first found me months ago. The air smelled of coffee and old vinyl booths. I never thanked you, I told Clara, for staying through all this. She stirred her cup. You didn't have to. I knew you'd come out whole. I didn't, I said. I came out changed. But maybe that's better. She reached across the table, resting her hand on mine. Then maybe you finally understand what your uncle saw in you. I looked out the window at the dark street, the faint reflection of my own face in the glass. The man staring back wasn't the broken husband or the confused heir. He was someone rebuilt, one scar at a time. And for the first time, I felt the truth of it, not as a line in a story, but as something written into my bones. Sometimes fortune isn't about what you gain. It's about what you refuse to lose. The waves broke softly against the shore, rhythmic and patient, like they had been waiting for him. Michael stood on the porch of the small seaside house he bought under a quiet name, watching the morning light spill across the water. It wasn't a mansion or a penthouse. It was modest, almost plain. But to him, it was everything. No butlers. No security detail. No noise. Just the salt wind and the sound of gulls circling above the horizon. For the first time since the inheritance, since his life had twisted into a storm of cameras, lawyers, and ghosts, there was peace. He didn't want the world's attention. He wanted silence, the kind that didn't demand, didn't judge, didn't ask for proof. Victor had called weeks earlier with the final settlement news. The case was closed. Every fraudulent claim had been dismissed. Every distant cousin who tried to claw a piece of Sebastian's will was exposed. Leora had disappeared from the tabloids after her testimony failed spectacularly, her greed shown in full view. The media had devoured her scandal, then moved on to the next one. Michael didn't follow. He didn't need to. He'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like release. Now, instead of buying yachts or private jets, Michael quietly began to give away what he had never been given, stability. He called it the Silent Fund. No press releases, no interviews, no gala dinners with champagne and cameras. He didn't even use his real name. The donations appeared in the ledgers of small nonprofits that nobody had ever written headlines about, women's shelters, addiction recovery programs, job centers for people with criminal records. He visited some of them, quietly, anonymously. A cap low over his eyes, a coffee cup in hand, just another face in a line of faces. At the shelter where he once slept on cold floors, the staff didn't recognize him at first. He stood in the same hallway where he'd once waited for soup and a cot. The same smell of bleach and canned beans. The same faded posters about hope. But this time, the receptionist smiled and said, "We just received the biggest anonymous donation we've ever had." Can you believe that? Michael only smiled back. Maybe good things find their way home. He spent the day there, mopping floors beside volunteers, helping unload crates, sharing silent nods with men who looked like the version of himself that used to live here. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel separate. He felt complete. Later that week, he returned to his old neighborhood. The corner store where he used to buy instant noodles had shut down years ago. Boarded windows, rusted locks, graffiti like scars across the brick. He bought it back. But instead of reopening it as a business, he rebuilt it as a community kitchen. No cash register. No prices. Just food, warmth, and a sign that read, "Come in. Eat." No questions. It became the quiet heart of the neighborhood. People came not for charity, but for belonging. And Michael would sometimes stand behind the counter, apron on, serving soup to tired workers and kids who reminded him of his own past. One evening, as the sun dropped low and the last of the diners drifted out, he felt the familiar presence behind him. Clara. She leaned against the doorway, wind tangling her hair. "So this is what you've been up to," she said softly. He smiled. Couldn't stay away from the place that started it all. She walked inside, eyes roaming over the tables, the faint laughter echoing from earlier. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You turned the world's noise into something gentle." He shrugged, wiping his hands with a rag. Silence is underrated. They both laughed, quietly, the kind of laughter that doesn't need to be loud to mean something. Clara had stayed in touch after the case ended. She'd written him letters instead of texts, long, thoughtful ones filled with small joys and honest fears. Over time, the letters turned into visits, the visits into dinners, and the dinners into shared mornings. Now, she'd moved into the small seaside house. Not as a guest, not as someone drawn to his fortune, but as a partner, one who saw him for who he'd been before the inheritance and for who he'd become after it. At night, they'd sit by the porch, a single lamp between them, and listen to the ocean. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. Silence had its own kind of dialogue. One night, Clara asked him quietly, "Do you ever think about it? The money, the mansion, all the people who wanted pieces of you?" Michael looked out at the sea, his reflection broken by the waves. Sometimes, he admitted. "But then I remember what Sebastian wrote. You were the only one who never asked for money." Maybe he wasn't talking about greed. Maybe he meant I never asked for more than what I already had. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "And what do you have now?" He smiled, a small, tired, honest smile. "Peace. And you." "That's plenty." A gentle breeze rolled through, carrying the scent of salt and new beginnings. The papers would never tell his story. There would be no headlines about the man who inherited millions and gave most of it away. The world liked louder stories, greed, betrayal, scandal. But Michael's was quiet. The kind of story that lives in whispers, in warm meals served anonymously, in a rebuilt corner store, in the laughter of strangers fed with no expectation. He no longer chased fortune. He lived among the spaces it had once hollowed out of him. And every morning, when the sun rose over the ocean and the world began its noise again, Michael Raines would sit on his porch, coffee in hand, and listen to the silence he'd earned, not as an escape, but as a home. He'd whisper to himself, sometimes, like a prayer, "I had to lose everything to hear this quiet." And in that quiet, hope didn't whisper back. It roared, softly, endlessly, like the sea. The sea was calm that morning, a low hum rolling beneath a sky painted in faded gold. The world was waking up slow, and Michael liked it that way. He sat at the small wooden table by the window, a mug of coffee cooling beside an open journal. The pen trembled slightly in his hand, not from weakness, but from the weight of what he finally knew how to say. The pages before him were filled with fragments, half-thoughts, unfinished sentences, sketches of moments that had once defined his pain. Words like homeless, divorce, empty, and forgiven scattered across months of ink. But today's page was different. Today, he wrote not to remember, but to release. He began simply, "Dear Michael," then paused, smiling faintly at the strangeness of writing to himself. To the man who'd slept on benches and forgotten what his own reflection looked like, to the man who had nothing and thought that meant he was nothing. "I thought money would fix what broke me," he wrote slowly, the words steady and deliberate, but it only revealed who was already whole. He stared at the line for a long time, letting it breathe. It was true. The inheritance hadn't changed him. It had only amplified the pieces that had survived the storm. Compassion. Resilience. Quiet. On the wall beside him hung one of Sebastian's old letters, framed and faded from sunlight. The ink had bled slightly with time, but the words still held their shape. Use it to rebuild, not to repay. He remembered the first time he read that, sitting in his uncle's empty study surrounded by dust and regret. Back then, it had sounded like forgiveness. Now, it sounded like instruction. He looked around his little seaside home, the chipped table, the open windows, the soft thud of waves beyond the dunes. Nothing extravagant. No designer furniture. No gleaming trophies of wealth. Just simplicity. Just space to think, to write, to live. Outside, the gulls swooped low over the water. Clara was in town, helping coordinate the new kitchen branch. She'd left a note on the counter before sunrise. "Don't forget to eat. And smile at least twice today." He smiled now. That counted as once. He continued writing. "I've learned that fortune isn't measured in dollars, but in quiet mornings like this one. In knowing you can give without losing yourself. In having someone who stays, not because they need to, but because they want to." The pen paused again. He leaned back, running a hand through his graying hair. The man who'd once been a ghost beneath bridges now had a life so unremarkable, it was beautiful. He closed the journal softly and looked out toward the ocean. It was time for his walk. The sand was cool beneath his feet, the wind gentle, carrying the scent of salt and pine. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes tracing the horizon. Every step felt grounded, real. A stranger passed him on the path, a man in jogging gear, earbuds in, nodding politely as he passed. Michael nodded back, smiling. The jogger didn't know. Didn't need to. To him, Michael was just another man taking a morning walk, not someone who had once been splashed across tabloids as the miracle heir, not the quiet philanthropist funding a dozen lives under false names. Just a man with worn shoes and peace in his eyes. And that anonymity, that normalcy, was the richest thing of all. He stopped at the edge of the water, the tide lapping at his ankles. The waves whispered, soft and endless, folding over each other like time itself was forgiving him. He closed his eyes. He thought of Sebastian, the uncle who'd watched from afar, who'd seen something worth saving when no one else did. He thought of Victor, steady and professional, who'd given him not just paperwork but dignity. He thought of Clara, sunlight in human form, and of all the people whose names he'd never know, whose hunger he'd quietly fed. Use it to rebuild, not to repay. He whispered the words aloud this time, letting them drift into the sea breeze. Then he took the letter he'd written to himself, folded it neatly, and placed it in his pocket. It wasn't for anyone else to read. Maybe one day he'd leave it on a bench, or slip it into a library book for a stranger to find. Or maybe he'd keep it as proof that he'd made it home to himself. The sun rose higher, scattering light across the water. He turned back toward the little house, toward coffee gone cold, toward the life he'd built with quiet hands. Behind him, the waves kept whispering. Ahead of him, the day waited, unhurried, unowned. And as he walked, the thoughts settled deep in his chest, calm and certain. He had inherited more than money. He had inherited another chance, and this time he hadn't wasted it. The sea roared faintly, echoing his peace. And somewhere inside him, Michael Rains, once broken, once lost, finally exhaled. The sea was calmer that spring, softer somehow, like it remembered him. Michael stood by the rebuilt community kitchen, its windows open, laughter spilling out. The sign above the door read, "The Rains House." Below it, a small line was etched in brass. Use it to rebuild, not to repay. Clara stood beside him, clipboard in hand, her smile warm and unhurried. Kids ran past them with trays of food. Volunteers called out names, and the smell of fresh bread drifted through the air. A year ago, he had walked these streets invisible. Now he walked them unseen in a different way, not for his money, but for the quiet work it did. The world had learned his name. He learned to let it go. That night, he opened his journal again. The first page still held his old letter to himself, a promise he'd kept. Beneath it, he added a new line. Peace isn't found. It's built one act of kindness at a time. He closed the book, hearing the ocean outside. For the first time in a long time, Michael didn't need to write the ending. He was already living it.